Those extra dings were my phone, getting text messages. Life is full of surprises, said Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it certainly seems to be true. And while it's also common to hear people say, especially bosses, I don't like surprises, I've been surprised by joy so often that I relish the surprises that come my way. For instance, how could I have known this morning that my grandson Lawson would have come rolling in for his first ever church service this day? Perhaps I shouldn't be surprised. Both of my daughters used to come to church every year on Father's Day, and pretty much only Father's Day. So it was something of a tradition for all the years that I was serving up in Arborg. My niece called it the all-day church, because by the time you drove to Arborg, attended church, had lunch, and drove home, it was all day. The day was gone. So I never forced them to attend church with me. But every year on Father's Day, they would show up. So that was a delightful surprise this morning. Even more surprising, perhaps, is that my daughter chose to reveal to me that I was going to be a grandfather with a little box that I received exactly one day after I had railed at Barb Rudick, who told me not to give up on the hope of being a grandfather. And I said, Barb, it's never gonna happen. Don't mention it again. It's over. It's done. The next day, my daughter and her partner, Mitch, arrived up at our summer home north of Gimli with a little box big enough to hold a cup. I opened it up and I pulled out a little hat with Snoopy and Woodstock on it. And I set it aside. And then I pulled out a little jumper, a onesie, with Snoopy and Woodstock on it. And I set it aside. And at the bottom of the box, it said, arriving March 2023. A delightful surprise. Just like like this morning's surprise. And of course, I could have no way of knowing, not realizing that Lawson would be here, that my choice of tie this morning with Charlie Brown and Snoopy would be an echo of that event from last year. What a morning. What a surprise. What delight. Who doesn't like a surprise party? And who isn't moved by one of those so-called flash mobs that pop up from time to time? I'll admit that I'm no longer surprised by flash mobs the way I once was. But I've been so delighted by some that I've watched them over and over and over again until the surprise is gone, but the joy remains. The first flash mob that sticks in my memory took place in the historic Central Station in Antwerp, Belgium, 14 years ago. I'm sure many of you have seen it. 4 minutes of pure delight. Over the loudspeaker, Julie Andrews sang the song Do Re Mi as a single couple begins dancing to it in the center of the station as spectators watch in surprise. They were joined by another couple, and another, until the floor began to fill. A minute and a half in, a swarm of school children came storming down the grand staircase, and the dancers swelled to 200. Through it all, bystanders glowed with delight. I mean, the kind of glow that would burn itself into your eyes if you were there. It appears that a few of the bystanders even put down their bags and joined the performers, entirely unscripted, but not missing a beat. A familiar song, the element of surprise, the most unlikely of locations, and everyone overflowed with joy. Well, nearly everyone. I'm sure there were a few curmudgeons in the crowd who felt inconvenienced or intruded upon, but overwhelmingly, people seemed to be delighted. It turns out that, not surprisingly, the flash mob was a promotional performance for a Belgian television program searching for someone to play the lead role in the musical The Sound of Music. They pulled it off with only 2 rehearsals during the quiet hours before unleashing the final performance as the station filled with commuters. It was more effective in drawing attention to the show than they could have possibly imagined. There's another flash mob that caught me by surprise the first time I saw it. And as it happens, it seems that it was also done for promotional purposes, this time for a local bank. It was a performance of Beethoven's Ode to Joy in a public square in Sabadell, just north of Barcelona, Spain. It opens with children scooting around in the square while a lone double bassist stands, dressed in formal attire, until a young girl drops a coin into a top hat in front of him. She smiles, and he plays the opening lines of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony before being joined by a cellist. Soon the violas arrive, and a bassoon, and then the violins and other woodwinds. The second violins appear along with a conductor, and the orchestra is complete. About 3 minutes in, the choir strolls into the square singing, some carrying children on their shoulders. When the full chorus begins, onlookers join in singing. Children dance, people smile, tears flow, the joy is palpable. Even so, despite the delight, I don't always like surprises. And while I'm no longer surprised by either of these flash mobs, seeing them again can reduce me to a blubbering bundle of tears or a giddy bundle of delight. And I can never know ahead of time which I will be. So I watch these videos in private, almost a sort of pornography of delight. I watch whenever I need a lift. But either way, I'm overcome by a profound sense of joy. You see, joy may be almost inseparable from sorrow, as we are discovering collectively this morning. I will sometimes find myself speaking with people following a memorial service when someone takes my hand, looks into my eyes with a warm and friendly gaze, and says, "I enjoyed the service very much." As the words leave their mouth, their expression changes. Some look surprised, others look embarrassed. Almost all look concerned about their apparent enthusiasm, and some seem mortified. And they say awkwardly, "Well, you know what I mean." Often they'll struggle to find alternative words for the feelings they experienced, words that feel a little more neutral emotionally, a little less enthusiastic. But I long ago concluded that what people really mean at such times is they really enjoyed it. Now, We obviously don't enjoy the circumstances that compel us to bid farewell to a friend or a neighbor, a loved one or an intimate. Yet it is surprising how the end of life or some other significant misfortune or setback or disappointment often opens us up not only to life's pain, not only to its sorrow, but also to life's joy. At such times, I'm reminded of the words of Khalil Gibran, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the selfsame well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears." When you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. When you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. Joy is commonly defined as an intense and especially ecstatic or exultant happiness, or as a source or an object of pleasure or satisfaction. To be joyful is to be filled with ecstatic happiness or pleasure, delight, or satisfaction. Etymologically, the word is related to the word gaudy. That's spelled G-A-U-D-Y. In case any of you were worried, I might be trying to cleverly slip something theological into the sermon by invoking the G word. Gaudy. Gaudy is something sophisticated individuals are loath to become, however much joy we may experience. And the joy itself, and the word joy itself, ultimately derives from a root implying religious fear or awe, which is what leads us, with all people of faith, whether conservative or liberal, old-fashioned or modern, to, well, rejoice. We rejoice in life, in love, in faith. One of my beloved professors from the University of Winnipeg, Paul Trudinger, I've mentioned him before, he always said that happiness happens, but joy abides. It was a lasting lesson he had acquired from a popular Christian children's song from decades ago, which he perhaps first learned around the fire in Sudan, where he was born and where he grew up, the son of Christian medical missionaries in that country. He took the song to heart, and during the years when I saw him several times a week, he lived by its sentiment. Happiness happens, but joy abides. We live in a society that is obsessed with the pursuit of happiness and is, as a consequence, so often disappointed. In contemporary usage, happiness is so often such a superficial emotion. Happiness can be satisfied by a consumer culture. It can be achieved through the lucky happenstance of stumbling from one outward success to another, from one satisfying occasion to another. By contrast, joy involves a quality of depth, which the pursuit of happiness will never quite satisfy. As such, the joy that abides is oftentimes accompanied by disappointment and sorrow, by failure and doubt, by grief and loss. It can truly be our sorrow unmasked, reminding us, in the colloquial expression of Arlo Guthrie, that you can't have a light without a dark to stick it in. So often, It is the contrast between disappointment and satisfaction, privation and pleasure, sorrow and delight that leads us to discover joy. Do you know the tale of woe behind Beethoven's Ode to Joy? The song they sang in Sabadell? The choral high point of the Ninth Symphony? I believe it's one of the most magnificent compositions in musical history, although I concede that this is a subjective opinion. Ludwig van Beethoven was born in Bonn in 1770 into a musical family. His father, Johann, a gifted singer and instrumentalist, was also a drunkard and a bully. So young Ludwig had a difficult childhood. He studied under Haydn in Vienna and was recognized as a prodigy with great promise. As his career was taking off, he faced a grave personal crisis. Beethoven was already going deaf in his 20s. At 26, he was plagued by tinnitus, an unrelenting ringing in his ears. He had begun going seriously deaf at 28, and just 3 years later, he'd lost 60% of his hearing. At that point, 7 of his 9 symphonies were still in the future. He contemplated suicide, but chose instead to live for his art. In 1816, at the age of 46, he was completely deaf. He was also unhappy in love. The immortal beloved is an unknown woman to whom he wrote in 1812, and unrequited love seems to have been his lot in life. He wrote of his existential mystery in the Heiligenstadt Testament, a long letter to his younger brothers, which was never sent, but revealed the depth of his pain and anguish. It is against this backdrop that Beethoven composed the Ninth Symphony with its magnificent choral piece, Ode to Joy, one of the greatest celebrations of joy known to humankind. Although he conducted its premiere performance, he never heard it except in his mind, where the music lived, where the joy was found. This connection between sorrow and joy, disappointment and delight, always brings me back to Rabindranath Tagore. It was actually when I conducted the memorial service for my sister-in-law, Kathy, a few years before the flash mob in Antwerp, that I realized Tagore is my psalmist. His poems and prose sing to me as surely as the Psalms of the old Hebrew scriptures have sung to generations of Jews and Christians. And I thought of Tagore's observation that the song that I came to sing remains unsung to this day. I have spent my days in stringing and in unstringing my instrument. It is when we experience deep sadness or deep joy, oftentimes together, that we are spared from the busyness of stringing and unstringing our instruments to focus more clearly on what is simply important and deep and valuable. Tagore's insights should come as no surprise to us. He himself survived early loss, and much of his poetry is about finding joy precisely in those circumstances that try our souls, where things aren't going very well, precisely at the point where we think our sorrow may be so great to bear that we cannot see our way through it. Precisely in those times when life really does deliver us a curveball and we wonder whether we'll ever get back into the game again. It is precisely then, says Tagore, that we need to be conscious of the joy of our existence. It is precisely then that we feel the strains of joy in our life in their full richness. And they are strains. Strains like the beautiful music that flows forth from the songs we sing or the symphonies we play. But they are strains too, for we live in that tension, the tension between life's joy and its sorrow. It is that which gives us delight that will in time bring us great sorrow. And truth be told, the sorrow may almost be worth it. For to experience life's disappointments and its sorrows, to truly feel our pain along with others, is to open ourselves to the great joy that makes our sorrow real. Gladness is the one criterion for truth, Tagore wrote, and we know we have touched it by the music truth gives, by the joy it sends to the truth in us. It is not as ether waves that we receive our light. The morning does not wait for the scientist to introduce it. In the same way, we touch the reality within us only when we receive love or goodness, not through the erudite discussion of ethical doctrines. Nearly a decade ago, I delivered a series of lectures at Eliot Institute, an intergenerational camp for Unitarian Universalists and kindred spirits that's held in Seebeck, Washington. On that particular occasion, my theme was Your Life Symphony, a work in progress. And it turned out to be my swan song as I was leaving the Unitarian Universalist Association, preparing to embark upon what Monty Python would have called something completely different, for what I expected to be the last decade of my career. My ministry was in my past. Our lives can be full of despair, failure, and disappointment, I said. Living life as a symphony demands that we understand life's individual movements as not having the final word or the final note, but that we take our lives as a whole. It involves transcending life's disappointments to live for whatever it is that is our personal testament. And so it is that we are called to embrace life's joy, even amidst its difficulties. This is not some glib truth. It is the nature of the world in which we live, that we are forever visited by life's sorrows as well as life's joys. And if we are paying attention, we will embrace the strains of joy and make them our own, allowing them to burst forth from us like a strain of music, to celebrate the marvel and miracle of life, to know that it's beauty and know that it's right there before us, to understand the deep truth that this life is so precious precisely because we ultimately lose it. And so, with Rabindranath Tagore, may we affirm all the strains of joy that blend together in life's sorrows to create the symphonies of our lives. The joy that makes the earth flow over in the riotous excess of the grass. The joy that sweeps in with the tempest, shaking and waking all life with laughter. The joy that sits still with its tears on the open red lotus of pain. and the joy that throws everything it has upon the dust and knows not a word save for joy. Our closing hymn is number 305, De Caloris.